We all have moments in our life that define us, and sometimes those moments we can never forget. And yet other times we do everything we can to forget. We're going to find out about some of those key moments in Koyomi Araragi's life in this volume of the Monogatari series, Owarimonogatari Part 1. The End Tale, the beginning of the original end of the Monogatari series. This one written by Nisioisin with artwork by Vofan. It's released officially in English by Vertical with a translation by Ransom. If you want to pick up your own copy of this one, I'll have a link in the description down below. So at the beginning of the End Tale, a three-part end of the Monogatari series. This was initially the real end of the series, and then of course Nisioisin couldn't resist writing more, so came back, wrote a whole bunch of side stories, and then I guess has now started a new season in Japan. In any case, this one really does feel like the beginning of the wrapping up of this series. With this one, of course, we're stepping back in time because, of course, we had the end of Koyomi Monogatari that kind of, well, had a pretty shocking ending. I won't spoil it just if for some reason you're watching this video and haven't read that volume. But in any case, we are actually going back in time and we're starting to have some blanks filled in for us that have happened previously in the series. This volume goes a long way to giving us background on Araragi himself. He's always been one of those characters that seemed a little bit odd, a character very much wanting to help others improve, wanting to save other people, and yet at the same time really disparaging his younger sister's overblown idea of justice. We have a character who revels in dialogue and in having snappy conversations and puns and such, but at the same time when we started this series he really was entirely antisocial and felt like friends lowered his intensity as a human being. He's always had this little bit of a dichotomy of a character, and so in this volume we find out sort of the background of all of that. How we had Koyomi Araragi, who was a believer in justice much like his sisters, and then fell out of that belief and stopped believing so much in this fervent idea of justice. We have this character who had friends, had things going on in life, and suddenly stopped kind of wanting to be around others. We have this character who has not been the greatest student in this entire series, and yet for some bizarre reason has always been really good at math. And why is that? Is it just a gift? Is there a particular reason? Well, all of those things are what we have finally answered in this book. And it starts off with him being trapped in this mysterious classroom with the even more mysterious Ogi. Ogi, of course, we have met several times throughout the previous volumes. It is hinted at very heavily that she is sort of an antagonist figure of this series. And this volume actually goes back to the point where we actually have her and Araragi meeting for the very first time. So it's filling in all sorts of little gaps because Araragi has had dealings with Ogi throughout a number of other volumes, while of course, as I said, we're going back in time now. We're having the two of them meet for the first time. We're having them have this incident occur where the two of them find themselves trapped in this very mysterious classroom that doesn't seem to be, well, it shouldn't exist, honestly, is the question. And then, of course, them trying to figure out how it is that they escape. Something that ties in very powerfully to a memory that Araragi has. This sets him on a course of revelations of things that he himself has actually locked away in his mind and tried to do his best to forget, or to turn a blind eye to, or to purposely misinterpret what he had as far as memories go, all for the purpose of trying to protect himself, if not protect someone else, or even to sort of put aside this idea that he was incapable of saving someone. We also have a new character introduced, an Oikura, who is a classmate of Araragi's. In a way, there's a lot of mystery about this character, and obviously, well, it's not even a spoiler to say that she sort of ties into the events of this book. Obviously, she's being introduced for a reason. Now, her story is just as fascinating and just as interesting as this journey of Araragi discovering his past and sort of revealing what made him into the person that we have read about for so many books. All in all, part 1 of Owarimonogatari is probably up there as one of my favorite books in the Monogatari series. I think really it's a toss-up between it and Koi Monogatari. I would say that of all of the ones that Araragi himself is the first person narrator of, this is definitely my favorite so far in the series. I think it's because it really blends the best parts of this series. The characters themselves, so giving us those good character building moments. It has, of course, moments of snappy dialogue, although in this volume there's so much going on and so much story that it kind of doesn't have those 80 pages of inane banter that we get in some of the previous volumes. We have that dialogue, we have that character building, there's the mystery elements, there's of course this somewhat like horror elements, but they're not as, how would I put it, in supernatural horror. But definitely we have this sort of darker sense of humanity and memory and life in general. It combines all of these best components that have existed throughout the series and puts them into this one single volume that just continues to have impact after impact as you go along. It certainly doesn't hurt either that you have a really choice moment with Senjogahara, and of course Hanekawa comes back into the scene and spends probably about the back third of the book helping Araragi, and these are two ladies that I am always happy to see back in the books, especially as Hanekawa has not really been heavily featured in the last several volumes, and neither has Senjogahara, honestly, and Senjogahara isn't in this one a lot, but let's just say that she leaves a real impact with where she is featured in this book. All in all, I would say this is probably one of the most compulsively readable volumes that I've found of the Monogatari series. I often find with this series that I usually have to warm up to it. That, you know, there's that initial, I won't call it a slog because I still like it, but there's that initial part that you kind of feel like, okay, I'm not really drawn into this, it's fun and all, but this one, there were all these moments that I just really needed to know what was going on, and it really pulled me along and pulled me in to the story of, as I said, Araragi himself, and of course of Oyakura as well. And I would say perhaps my only complaint about this volume was how heavily it relies on Araragi having a horrible memory. Now, it's not completely unrealistic that especially a younger child might block certain things out of his mind or may purposely misinterpret what he's remembers or what he has seen in order to protect himself in some sense. But it just seemed to happen so often. Well, not so often. It's like, what, 2-3 times? But it just seemed to me that it was used just a little too much and in too short a period. You know, if we were talking about him forgetting about something that happened 8 years ago, totally I buy that. But when you're only talking time frames of like skips of 2, maybe 3 years, it becomes a little harder to say, oh yes, I completely understand how he would be totally unaware and have suppressed that memory to the point of complete forgettance. That to me was at times probably a little bit of a stretch in this book. That said, though, when that's my only complaint, and quite honestly, everything else that happens in this book more than compensates for it, and certainly that did not completely destroy my enjoyment of the book. I would say that says something right there. As I'm sure you can tell, I was a really big fan of this volume. As I said, certainly my favorite of all of the Araragi ones that have been narrated, and in terms of the entire series, I really felt like this was right up there with Owarimonogatari, which by far had been my favorite up until this point. And again, like, I'm kind of having a hard time deciding which one I like better between the two. This one, of course, coming out to the end, as I said, really feeling that, you know, really feeling this sort of starting to tie up loose ends, giving us this more background on Araragi, sort of giving us more of an idea of why he's been the person he's been for the entirety of the series. Again, sort of giving us more insight into Ogi and just how much Ogi's been kind of manipulating things throughout the series, not just in the little glimpses that we've had, but, you know, going back some time that this is happening. I'm really looking forward to reading the rest of End Tale, and then of course there's Zoku Owarimonogatari, which I believe is sort of like a bookend of the series that's kind of like an alternate reality take, I think, if I recall. But in any case, this first part of End Tale, fantastic. Like I said, definitely one of my favorite volumes of the series to date, and really has me excited to read the next parts. I'm going to do a couple I think what I'm going to do is do sort of like 2 reviews and then do another Owari to read, and then, you know, hopefully I can be just about caught up by the time Zoku comes out in December and we finish this series. In this video, I want to say a special thanks to Michaela Werner, Mirage, Jean-Luc Chartier, Ine Elkana, and New Valaric for their support on Patreon, as well as the support of all of my patrons who help me to keep this channel going, and also help to support all of my other light novel related projects like the Light Novel Podcast and EnglishLightNovels.com. So those are my rather enthusiastic views of part 1 of Owarimonogatari. For my next review, though, I'm going to do something, well, I mean, it's still supernatural and set in the modern world, so it's kind of in the same vein, but it's totally not. And that is going to be volume number 1 of High School DxD. Yes, the classic light novel series that spawned numerous seasons of anime and opie lovers everywhere. I can't believe I just said that. Anyway, it's finally out in English, so of course I've got to check it out. That'll be my next review. In the meantime, thank you so much for joining me in this video, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Till then, bye-bye for now.